During the 4th century BC, Asia Minor, Africa, and the rest of the then known Orient was turned upside down by a military and political earthquake that changed the course of history. The man who brought about this upheaval was the youngest military adventurer in history, Alexander the Great. Alexander's Macedonian phalanxes didn't just bring military change. The Macedonian conquests also created a cultural revolution. Alexander brought with him the Greek culture that was adopted, reworked, and transformed by artists from different ethnic backgrounds who drew inspiration from it and invented a new way of conceiving art. We now attribute this to the period known as Hellenistic. Alexander brought Ionia, the Phoenician region, and Egypt under his control. To the east, he conquered the entire Persian Empire as far as the Indus River. After him, nothing was as it had been before. And now that its culture had spread everywhere, Greece lost its vital central role. Kingdoms sprang up in Egypt, Syria, Macedonia, and at Pergamum in what is now Turkey. These kingdoms signaled the dawn of a new period called Hellenism. Of the many art forms involved in this revolution, the one that most clearly shows the change is sculpture. This is the celebrated Hermes of Praxiteles, discovered at Olympia, one of the most important works of art before Alexander, in other words, classic Greek art. Here the artist seeks balance, clean lines, and perfection of form, a harmony based on aesthetic canons that lay down mathematical proportions and are quite independent of reality. This statue is the Cleopatra of Delos. It's from the Hellenistic period. It's not famous, nor is it particularly valuable. The very fact, however, that it is commonplace is an insight into the artist's mind. He's interested in everyday reality, real people, their traits, their features. The women's fashion of the day is evident. Rendering draperies this fine was a real test of skill for the Hellenistic sculptor. As Greece expanded its realm throughout the Middle East, its own artists and craftsmen, looking for creative inspiration, were enticed to explore the flourishing cities on the other side of the Aegean. They headed for Ephesus and Pergamum. In Ephesus, archaeologists found this frieze, a hunting scene, a wild boar pursued by an officer on horseback. Initially, they were puzzled. Greek art usually depicts scenes from mythology, and the hunter's clothes weren't what they expected. Once all the fragments had been assembled, the mystery was solved. The scene was part of the great frieze sculpted in this little temple, the Temple of Hadrian, which was later rebuilt. The stones tell a story in pictures, and by studying them, it's possible to identify the legend from which the sculptor drew his inspiration. Androclus, the son of the Athenian king Codrus, learns from the oracle of Apollo that he'll be driven out of Athens, and that a fish and a boar will choose a place for him to found a new city. Arriving on the coast of Anatolia, he lights a fire and cooks a fish. A spark starts a fire in the underbrush, and he sees a boar running away from it. Androclus chases the boar, and at the exact spot where he kills it, he founds the city of Ephesus. The city we see today dates only from later Roman times, but the streets are the same and laid out with gridiron simplicity, so different from the chaotic nature of Athenian streets. This method of laying out cities was born just south of Ephesus in the Hellenistic city of Miletus, the birthplace of the first urban planner to design orderly, regular cities. His name was Hippodamus of Miletus, and his theories regarding city planning spread first to other Greek cities, then to the Romans, who built their cities on regular line patterns, and have even influenced present-day urban planning. At Ephesus, the right-angled streets also serve to differentiate between areas. This one, known as the Slope, was particularly wealthy. The houses have sumptuously decorated interiors. And here, carefully secluded in the side streets, is a brothel. Like many houses in the city, it was luxurious, with heating facilities and hot and cold water. And etched into the pavement on the main street is perhaps the advert for the brothel's services: a heart, a woman's face, and a foot showing which direction to take. Here we see a great library built around a tomb. Archaeologists had never found anything like this before from the ancient world, a building obviously designed to house thousands of scrolls, and inside it, a sarcophagus. Faced with a unique mix of two totally different buildings, a library and a mausoleum, scholars set out to discover why. To be buried, as in this case, in the center of the city, was an honor granted only to someone who deserved to be remembered as a hero. The unearthing of a number of inscriptions revealed that the building had been erected by Julius Aquila Poleminus in honor and memory of his father Celsus, a senator and magistrate in the 2nd century AD. By building a library in front of his father's tomb, Julius sought to remind his fellow citizens that man attained heroic status only through the wisdom contained in the thousands of parchment scrolls that were housed in this amazing library. It's one of the finest examples of Hellenistic architecture. The central columns are taller than those along the sides, just as the upper columns are shorter than those below. What we see, in fact, is something straight out of the theatre. The architect makes his facade leap upward in a surge of movement. And it's this movement, foreign to classicism, that's one of the typical characteristics of Hellenistic art. The most famous monument at Ephesus, however, is a colossal work, one that would inspire awe for centuries: the Temple of Artemis. I have seen the gardens of Babylon, the statue of Olympian Zeus, the Colossus of Rhodes, the pyramids of Egypt, the Pharos of Alexandria, and the mausoleum of Halicarnassus. But having seen the Temple of Artemis, which reaches the very clouds, all the other wonders fade before my eyes. The Greek writer Pausanias described the temple, comparing it with the 6 other wonders of the ancient world. His words sent archaeologists out to track down the Artemisium, but for many years the monument remained a chimera. many gave up. Byron himself was disappointed by the place. I have beheld the Ephesians' miracle. Its columns strew the wilderness, and dwell the hyena and the jackal in their shade. But time never did completely obliterate the ruins of Ephesus. Though abandoned and neglected, the city has always been recognizable, and scholar after scholar has tried to identify a square or a temple from the base or drum of a column. Not everyone lost heart like Byron. In 1866, during excavations near this theatre, an inscription was found that revealed where the Artemisium lay. Unfortunately, of that wonder of the ancient world, only a single column remains. The temple, the largest in the Greek world, was over 112 meters long and 53 meters wide, with columns nearly 18 meters high. Construction started in 560 BC and lasted almost 100 years with constant restoration. The roofless, colonnaded interior housed a primitive statue of Artemis, and the columns of the porch carried reliefs of mythical characters. There were probably a considerable number of votive statuettes. Then, as now, one of the most popular souvenirs from Ephesus was the figure of the goddess, a cult idol. The Romans built their advanced cities in Hellenistic style. A wonderful example is Leptis Magna, an archaeological site near Tripoli in Libya. Thanks to the dedicated labors of a succession of archaeological missions, magnificent buildings have been unearthed and rebuilt. These Hellenistic monuments were built 500 years after Alexander the Great. The ruins here show that Hellenism was no momentary fashion trend, here today, gone tomorrow, but has left its indelible mark on all the arts. As well as Ephesus, another major Hellenistic city in Ionia was Pergamum. Excavations at the sanctuary of Asclepius revealed an imposing complex capable of holding vast crowds. They came for the miracle-working waters, waters that would cure terrible diseases. Asclepius was the god of medicine, and it was widely believed that bathing in these miraculous springs, observing a diet based on these waters, could cure any illness. The water here really does have curative properties. On analysis, it's been found to be naturally radioactive and can help cure certain conditions. Gathering in the temple, the faithful could obtain cures from great physicians of the day, the most famous being Galen. His name lives on today in the word pharmacists use to describe traditional, handmade, vegetable-based medications. Galenical. Besides the famous sanctuary and temples, Pergamum established itself as the preeminent artistic and intellectual center of Anatolia. It was this city that revolutionized the art of writing through its invention of a new writing surface, parchment. Pergamum was the site of one of the largest libraries in the ancient world, comparable in importance only to that of Alexandria. According to a legend recounted by Pliny, King Ptolemy V of Egypt refused to supply papyrus to King Eumenes II of Pergamum in the 2nd century BC for fear that he would create a library greater than his own. Eumenes decided to perfect the treatment of sheepskin to make it fine and easy to handle, and as suitable for writing on as papyrus. The result was parchment, and Eumenes' library eventually surpassed even that of Alexandria. Pergamum also boasted an unusual theatre, as tall as it is deep. 80 rows of seats rising more than 30 meters up a hillside, so incredibly steep it made the job of building it virtually impossible. Why would they have built something so daring? After archaeologists had excavated the Acropolis, the upper city of Pergamum, they realized that all the most important constructions had been built on a series of overhanging terraces. It's clear from this model of the Acropolis that at the center of this highly dramatized cityscape was the theater. The entire city had been designed to impress the visitor and heighten the splendor of the panorama below. The great altar of Zeus at Pergamum is one of the few wonders of the ancient world that can still be admired today in all its beauty. But it's no longer in Pergamum, but at the Pergamum Museum in Berlin. I stood there sadly, looking at the magnificent Corinthian capitals, each as tall as a man, the rich bases, and the other architectural elements all overgrown and covered with undergrowth and wild figs. Nearby, smoke rose from a lime kiln into which all the marble blocks that could be hammered into fragments ended up. With these words, in 1865, archaeologist Carl Humann described the day he reached the Acropolis of Pergamum. For years, the site had lain in total abandonment. The remains of the magnificent buildings were being used as a quarry. Marble was being burned down into lime. One of the greatest treasures of the artistic heritage of mankind was being reduced to dust. Humann and German Kaiser Wilhelm I appealed to the Turkish Prime Minister until Humann was granted permission to excavate. He started by unearthing the many marble slabs. Comparing such slabs with classical accounts, the German scholars confirmed that they had definitely belonged to the great altar of Pergamum. 129 slabs carved with figures in high relief, 130 inscriptions and other statues, friezes and architectural elements were rescued and soon were on their way to Berlin. Where these two trees grow today is where the once great altar of Pergamum stood, built by sculptors trained at Pergamum, the fathers of a new art style. The work of Humann, the Pergamum Museum and archaeologists allows us to see how this ancient monument would have looked in all its splendor. The building was not tall, less than 9 meters in fact, but it made an impressive dramatic impact all the same, mostly because of the sculptures that decorated it. Access to the altar was through a very small staircase, which enhanced the monument's visual impact. The Great Altar was a building unique in its own right. It wasn't a temple, had no college of custodian priests, and was open to all in every respect. It had also clearly been created with self-glorification in mind. The Pergamines wanted it to celebrate their military prowess. Above the plinth, the great altar at Pergamum featured an Ionic colonnade. The monument itself, an original Pergamene invention both in form and decoration, was 35 meters long and 35 meters deep. It was enclosed on 3 sides, while the fourth, which faced west and overlooked the valley, was occupied by the great stairway leading to the center of the colonnade, where the altar itself was located. The altar was considered the most important building in the city. It was constructed at the height of the Hellenistic period, during the time of the Attalid kings, when Pergamum gave its name to one of the 4 Hellenistic kingdoms. Long before Pergamum came under Roman rule, the Pergamines had defeated the Galatians, a Celtic barbaric tribe who raided the country, sacking and plundering. The altar was built to commemorate the victory of civilization over barbarism. In the inner court, aside from the altar, is a smaller frieze, the so-called Telephos frieze. Here, inside the colonnade, the sculptures tell the story of Telephos, the founding hero of the city and the son of Heracles. The Greeks' zeal for self-celebration, already evident in the classic period, was just as strong in the Hellenistic period. But the main story here is told by the larger frieze that surrounds the plinth. It's made up of stone slabs 2.5 meters high that once formed a continuous sequence 40 meters long. The frieze tells the story of the battle of gods and giants. The giants, who represent the forces of evil, have attacked Olympus, the home of the gods, the incarnation of good. The metaphor is obvious. This is the war in which the kingdom of Pergamum fought and defeated the barbarians. The great frieze was not the work of just one man, though. Many artists contributed to it, seeking a new way of conceiving art, a new way of glorifying the power and grandeur of the Hellenistic kingdoms. The interaction between the Greek culture of the Macedonians and the non-Greek societies of the old Persian Empire gave birth to a period of artistic innovation. Artists and architects, poets and philosophers sculpted more than individual statues. They built aesthetic foundations that would last for thousands of years. Hellenism and its depiction of beauty exalting human emotion in such grand fashion has become the fountainhead of all the arts.